Okay, I'm about 7 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. But I'm welcoming you to the Desert Blockchain Arizona FinTech Sandbox meeting or session here at the University of Advancing Technology. We're really grateful for UAT to host us here. It's a great facility. We've got some of their folks in the audience today, some of their students, as well as one of their administrators, a few of their administrators that I'll introduce in a moment. But just if who's here for the first time? We've never been to a Desert Blockchain. Wow, that's really, really cool. Because you being here tonight is part of us building the community in Arizona. So, something like shutting that door, and that one as well. And that's really what this is about, because we have an opportunity, especially with what we're going to be talking about tonight, to not only create a community that can create what's next in Arizona, but be part of what's being created for our global what's next, basically. So we have some folks to thank. We would like to thank the Arizona Commerce Authority. They are sponsoring the event tonight, the food and drinks and so forth. And yes, thank you. Tyler is here from ACA, and he's going to be talking a little bit about what's available to the business and entrepreneurial and innovation community through the ACA tonight. And so we've got some exciting topics tonight, but I'd like to introduce Robert Walker, who's Senior Admissions here at UAT, just to talk a little bit about what's available at UAT, because the students that I've met so far are amazing, and they all are have to do an internship before they graduate. So, Robert, if you'll tell us a little bit about UAT, appreciate it.
How's it going, guys? I saw a few people in here that were their first time in here. So we're the University of Advancing Technology. We're a technology university focused on tech, and we're so excited for Desert Blockchain to be here because we've incorporated blockchain in our curriculum. If you were here last time, you know that we actually have a blockchain course that is running in our undergraduate degrees. But blockchain is big, hence this meeting, hence you guys. And we're actually offering it in our graduate program as a certificate and part of our curriculum. So if you guys want to know a little bit more about that, I have some stuff for you. One is my business cards, call me maybe. And another is a printout. It actually has a list of what our programs looks like as far as the breakdown, what we teach as well, in addition to blockchain, software engineering, cybersecurity, hot topics there. If you want more information, let me know. Grab my card and send me a message.
Great. Thanks, Robert. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, this is being live streamed and recorded tonight. So if you don't want to be recorded, you might want to watch it on the live stream outside of the recording. So put it that way. So tonight, we have an opportunity to do something that's I consider to be really, really unique. This is like the start of a collaboration. It's a collaboration out of 3 fundamental elements of any particular ecosystem or initiative, new initiative or new paradigm. And those 3 elements are basically the technology, the business models, and the policy. I like to boil things down into 3s. And I look at all constructs pretty much in those particular 3 areas. And in the past, what's happened is we've had innovations like the internet and stuff like that, and those 3 things were kind of separate. And the policy kind of caught up later on after the internet was introduced and so forth. This blockchain and decentralized web construct is different. It's different because it's emerging and it's blending things together that have been completely different before, and it's blending things together in a new way, and it starts with value, basically, which has been under the existing sovereignties, and all sorts of things are on the table for disruption. So what we have tonight is an opportunity for the tech community that's in this room to start to collaborate with the policymakers and see if we can innovate in the realm of policy. I mean, the sandbox thing is really unusual. How many times in the past can you think of policy and regulations where they start with, hey, these are the things you can do? It's usually like, these are the things you can't do. So our policymakers in Arizona have a vision for Arizona. They want to see this state and this community be at the forefront of what's possible. And they've crafted some things that are going to give the innovators in this room, the people that have the ability to build stuff, some ground to play in. And you know, this is really, really incredible that we have this collaboration going on with the Arizona policymakers. So we have two folks tonight that are going to be talking about what's going on in Arizona in this round. We have Evan Daniels from the Arizona Attorney General's office, who's going to be talking about the FinTech Sandbox, what it will take to qualify for that, what the timing is, and so forth. And then we have Tyler Gentry from the Arizona Commerce Authority, who's going to talk a little bit about what the Arizona Commerce Authority has to offer and their global outreach and collaboration that's going on worldwide, and how this is basically like a focal point for many, many sectors of the world are watching what we're doing in Arizona to get some ideas as to what would work in their realms and their communities. So I'm going to start out with Evan Daniels of the Arizona Attorney General's office, and Evan, take it away.
Well, thank you, Jay, and thank you for the chance to be here. Thank you to all of you for taking time out of your schedule and lives to hear about what's going on. A disclaimer, first of all, I'm a lawyer after all. I am here tonight talking, the views that I express are mine and not necessarily those of the office.
No investment advice.
No investment advice, no legal advice, nothing like that. We're going to be I'm going to talk about some of the practical things that we expect to be doing in administering the sandbox. If that's something that might be of interest to you, hopefully this will be informative and give you some concrete information about how we're going to be accepting applications, the kinds of things that we're looking for. That said, again, this is my own expression of what those things are going to be. The actual experience may end up looking a little bit different, and maybe a little bit different for everybody. So with that said, I am by training a lawyer and a litigator. So this tech realm is something that's new to me, and so I'm probably a bit unique here in this room in that I know maybe less than most of you about where what these technologies are capable of, and where it's going. That said, I am in the position of trying to regulate and protect consumers. The Arizona Attorney General's office is the chief law enforcement office in the state, and one of our main missions is to protect Arizona consumers in a broad sense. Now, given that, it might seem strange that here I am talking about an innovation bill. Some might assume that those things are diametrically opposed. In my view, and I think in the Attorney General's view, they are not. And one of the reasons Attorney General Brnovich was such a strong proponent of this idea of FinTech Sandbox was because he believes that innovation is ultimately good for consumers. That a market that fosters innovation and creates those new opportunities for businesses, for persons, ultimately benefits consumers and improves people's lives that way. the regulators, we can't possibly keep up and deal with all of the fraud and wrongs that go on in the marketplace. And in our view, innovation can do a lot of that heavy lifting for us. So to that end, the sandbox, in my mind, makes a lot of sense for us to administer because we are interested in protecting consumers through innovation and being in collaboration with this community represented, I think, by most of you. And certainly I think the pillars that Jay referenced, it's absolutely something that we are interested in. This sandbox is going to be something of a more collaborative effort, I think, ultimately, than what you're used to seeing. And certainly that has been proven to be true in the other jurisdictions that have sandboxes. I'm thinking the FCA in the United Kingdom in particular. The role of the regulator there is very much it's one of partnership with those businesses and those persons that enter their sandbox. It's very collaborative. We're not as sophisticated as the FCA. We won't have as many staff working on this, unfortunately, but I think at a fundamental level, we expect for there to be a back and forth and a sense of communicating and learning from those who come into the sandbox, those who test in the sandbox. And I should say, philosophically, at least as far as I'm concerned, we don't exist as a regulator to pick the winners. We're there to administer the program. We're there to foster an environment where a business with an idea can come in, can test this product, and see if there's a market for it, and go from there. We understand that sometimes that doesn't work out. Sometimes it doesn't play out the way it was intended or hoped. And our goal, our role is not to be the gotcha cop where we're just looking, waiting for someone to fail and bring the hammer of the law down. Our role is to hopefully help businesses foresee where problems might arise, the risks that consumers might be facing in using new technology or new product or service, and hopefully heading off catastrophe so that we're not in the position where we talk about restoring consumers who may have lost some money. So with that philosophy aside, let me talk a little bit about the Arizona sandbox. And I encourage all of you, if you haven't read the actual law, I know it's not that long, but I encourage you all to read it. HB 2434, which goes into effect August 3rd of this year. It's also in our application will be live. We're hoping and expect that a version of the application will be publicly available in the next couple of weeks, hopefully the first week of July. So if this is of interest to you, keep an eye out for the launch of our landing page, and you hopefully will have some more public information that will be available about exactly what we're going to be looking for, especially if you're interested in applying. We're hopeful that putting that out there early gives people the chance to get a bit of a head start so that when August 3rd rolls around, there are some businesses ready to go. So that said, let me talk specifically, and I don't want to talk too long because when you're talking about nuts and bolts, ultimately, I think it's better to be a little bit more interactive. So I don't want to talk too long about the application process itself, but I do want to maybe give some information that ultimately is a bit of a primer for you. And I'm glad to take questions. I'll be sticking around. Please feel free to come up and talk with me. Let me start by saying it is a FinTech regulatory sandbox. So FinTech, it is FinTech specific. It isn't everything that has to be FinTech. It will have some limits on what can come into the sandbox and what sort of regulations on the state level are rolled back because of that. We're thinking of our FinTech sandbox being a particular use for 3 buckets of products and services, I'll call them. Money transmission, consumer lending, and investment advice. Those are the three areas of the law that this law was really designed to work in conjunction with. That obviously leaves out quite a bit of things like securities, things like insurance. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get everything that we were hoping to get as part of this program. We're optimistic that perhaps the law, if it's proven to work well and is not a major risk to consumers, as some might say, that there will be more willingness to expand the scope of what can come into the sandbox. But for now, think of those three kind of buckets. And this is admittedly one of the problems of regulation, is that we regulators are always trying to take something that might be a bunch of things and categorize it. And I recognize that that's somewhat of that's definitely a flaw. It doesn't account for everything here, but the law is often, as I said to someone else earlier, it's often trying to fit the round peg of thing you have into the square hole of the law itself. But the sandbox gives some flexibility for us as regulators to try to do that and to fashion something that might lead the way in helping us think about how to regulate in the future and what is the right way to regulate an innovative space. So that said, what is the sandbox application? What will it look like? Really, we're looking for two big categories of things. We're looking for an explanation and sufficient information to tell us what the risks to consumers might be and how a business has thought through those risks and how they might mitigate the risks that consumers might face in interacting and using the product or service coming into the sandbox. That's the first big bucket. The second big bucket is to demonstrate to us that you really know what you're doing. We don't anticipate that this is going to be a rubber stamp in the sense that everybody who submits an application is just going to be able to waltz right in. Because we at the Attorney General's office have the responsibility to allow businesses in or out of the sandbox, we are going to be looking for applicants to demonstrate that they really understand the technology, that they really understand the space that they're in, that they have some sense of how they might be regulated outside of the sandbox, so that once the test is complete, they're able to roll into becoming either fully licensed or figuring out a way to continue operating without a license if they don't need it. So with that said, what's it going to look like? It will be a submission of information to our office that we will receive along with an application fee. And once received, we will take up to, we have a 90-day limit to process those applications. We're hopeful that it will actually be a lot shorter than that. 90 days, though, will give us the opportunity to evaluate an initial submission and then have a back and forth if necessary if we need more information from what was ultimately first submitted. The form of it, what is it going to look like? We're going to want to know how the innovation benefits consumers. And innovation, I'm oversimplifying somewhat, but innovation in the law is defined as something that provides a benefit, solves a problem, or otherwise does not have a widespread offering in the state of Arizona. That's a pretty broad definition, but we expect applicants to have thought through how what they want to test out provides the benefit in accordance with the law. That might include demonstrating how the innovation is different from other things that might already exist in the state, that might already be fully licensed and operational. And as I mentioned earlier, what are the risks that consumers are going to confront? And we want to know in particular how the sandbox is going to enable a successful test. Tell us your vision for how you want your business, your idea to grow, and give us some concrete information to the extent you can on how you envision it working. A description of the proposed testing plan. Tell us how are you going to roll this out? How are you going to market it? What kind of consumer are you going to be targeting and going after? at what level of transaction in terms of the monetary amount, what are the size of the loans that you're offering. There are some caps that I should mention in the bill. It won't be an unlimited, we won't have an unlimited ability to issue consumer loans or transmit money. But we think that the caps that are there should provide sufficient level to allow you to get the data you need to prove your concept. And then, of course, how the test will be wound down and consumers protected if the test fails. These are general guidelines. I don't know that we anticipate. We want to make this not burdensome. And I know I just rattled off a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of considerations to think about. But we're not looking for reams of paper submissions that can only be done by lawyers, that you have to hire a lawyer to do. Quite the opposite. We think you can demonstrate your knowledge base, your ability to perform the test, your ability to think through risks, how you would mitigate those things in consumers. We're envisioning that won't take reams of paper, and we don't want it to take reams of paper. And I guess if I'm standing up here and you're having thoughts of that's a bunch of junk, of course this is going to take reams of paper, please come talk to me, because I'm very interested, as I am working on this issue in particular, how we can lower the burden of submitting an application. So I'd be very interested in everybody's thoughts on that. And of course, we also need to know in the application what and how you will be subject to the Attorney General's jurisdiction. As the consumer protection regulator, that's obviously something very important to us, especially if things go sideways. We want to make sure that we actually have the authority under the law to address whatever the issue might be. Some nuts and bolts on the sandbox. The sandbox is for a 24-month period. That's the maximum amount of time. I don't envision a scenario where you're locked in for 24 months. I think, speaking for myself, I can envision a successful test. You might be able to do it in 12 months. You might be able to do it in 18 months. That's something that we want to know about. We're very interested in knowing if that's your vision for your application, for your idea. If you intend to use the full 24 months, great. If it's going to be shorter in your mind, great. We want to know that too, because we want to be part of helping to the extent we can, right? Because we are, again, lawyers after all. We can't provide you with legal advice, but this is a more collaborative effort that we envision helping businesses be able to launch into getting fully licensed if that's necessary. If you do want to go obtain licensure, you can have up to 12 months to do that after the 24-month period is over. There is a 10,000 customer cap. Those customers have to be in Arizona. Customer is probably a not great word, but I don't know a better one. If you have a better one, please let me know. And then I already mentioned some of the caps that exist. All of the major consumer fraud measures in Arizona law still apply. Consumer Fraud Act still applies. Many of the anti-fraud provisions that are specific to the areas that I mentioned earlier, money transmission, consumer lending, and investment advice, those still apply and aren't rolled back because a business is in the sandbox. There are certain disclosures that businesses are going to have to provide, and that's going to be something that applicants should think through. If you want to get into the sandbox, you're going to need to be able to articulate to us what are the disclosures you are going to make as the applicant to people that you are servicing as customers, and what are those going to look like. Businesses in the sandbox will be required to retain records that are kept in the ordinary course. We envision that will be something of a lower burden than what you might have under some other laws. But obviously, we're going to want to be able to understand and see how the test is progressing and what's happening with the loans that might be being issued, the transactions that might be happening. As regulators, all that is ultimately important to us for assurances that consumers are receiving the protection they're entitled to under the law, that things are moving along in the way that the applicant represented that they would, or if things are maybe going a little bit slower, not working out quite as well. We want to be aware of that. We want to understand that that might be the case. And finally, before I stop talking, let Tyler talk about, I think, some of the more exciting aspects. Tyler, we thought we'll let Evan go first because he'll get the dry stuff out of the way. And Tyler can come out and talk about how this fits into maybe a bigger picture for Arizona. But to that end, one of the exciting things in my mind about the law that was passed, it allows for the Attorney General's office to enter into agreements with other jurisdictions that would potentially expand the scope of the sandbox. Yes, we will have caps that are specific to Arizona and might limit the extent that a sandbox participant can do business in Arizona. But if we're able to come to some agreements with other jurisdictions, that might have the potential of expanding some of the scope of that to allow an idea to scale faster, to have access to a wider base of customers. This is something that we are envisioning being able to partner with other jurisdictions that have programs like the Sandbox. We're hopeful that that is a way for us to learn, because as regulators, we learn from those that we regulate, but we also learn from those who are regulating others in different places. The ideas that can be shared amongst regulators are extremely beneficial. So to the extent that we're talking about collaboration here, it's not just between different types of communities, but those same communities in different places as well. That's something this legislation allows us to do. We will see how it works out, and it's something that I'm excited about. And I should mention, finally, there is a team of us working on this at the Arizona Attorney General's office. I am one of those. We expect that as applications come in, a team of people will be looking at them, to analyze them, interact with those who are going to be submitting applications. And it's something that I'm excited about and excited about learning. And I'm very grateful again to Jay and to this group for the opportunity to talk about this with all of you. And I'll be happy, as I said, to answer questions that you might have to the extent that I can. But look for the example application to be up sometime in the next few weeks. And please contact me if you have the opportunity to look at it and see flaws or spot things that might be more burdensome than we think. We are looking to hear from those who might be submitting applications to us. We want to hear how you all receive it and take it and understand it. So with that, thank you very much.
Thanks, Evan. All right. Yeah. So
Eric, that's $500.
Yeah, I think I think I don't know that that's decided, but I think it's going to be $500. So yes, that's an important piece.
So I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and have Tyler talk about the Arizona Commerce Authority and the global scope of this, and then we'll open it up for questions, because I expect pandemonium to break out as soon as there's questions.
That's great. Thanks, Jay.
Tyler Gentry of the Arizona
Good evening,
Commerce
everybody.
Authority.
I sit the Vice President Business Attraction role for the Arizona Commerce. I've done that for the last 3 years. My sole mission is to find companies that want to relocate and expand to our great state. And work for a tremendous organization. Just by a show of hands, how many of you know who the Arizona Commerce is? Okay, good. Well, let's start there then. We are the state's leading economic development organization. We were formed about 5 years ago. We were actually born out of the Department of Commerce. And the thought was that we needed to be more innovative, responsive as an economic development organization. And so we formed a public-private quasi-government agency to handle that. And what that means is that we're governed by a private board, which is chaired by Governor Ducey. Our leadership is driven by Sandra Watson, our CEO, and she's been there 5 years. We were just continued through this last legislative session for another 6 years. So we're doing something right. I think the numbers are, we've touched deals that have driven over 80,000 new jobs for the state of Arizona and an investment of almost $7 billion. So those are big figures. Obviously, we're going through a renaissance of sorts here. I've been here for 15 years, originally from Wyoming, but I spent time in Kansas City and Chicago. And this is home now. And over that 15 years, I've watched this place double. And I don't think we're going to slow down anytime soon as far as what I'm seeing with the interest in what we're doing. I want to talk a little bit about what we do specifically because our organization is diverse. I mentioned that I'm in the business attraction group, which is really looking outside of the state for opportunities. We have a business expansion team that's focused on growing our ecosystem in the different industries. Some of the more prominent sectors are advanced business services, aerospace and defense, advanced manufacturing. We have some bio work going on, and it's quite diverse, you know, for Arizona. I have been spending my time primarily up in the Northeast, in New York City and Boston, covering financial services, insurance, and tech. And beyond California, our neighbor, which is about 40% of our deal pipeline, the Northeast, believe it or not, is about 20%. So much greater appetite to come out west. If you look at our population growth in terms of in-migration, about 25% is coming from California. I won't call it a mass exodus, but it's definitely an exodus of sorts. And I think it's all about quality of life. You know, these markets that I'm talking about are burdensome, not only for business, but for people. The Arizona Commerce Authority also manages and administers all of our statutory incentive programs, which there are about 20 of them. And we're really governed. Our goals are focused on 3 things: net new job creation, the wages associated with those jobs, and the capital investment. And so if you compare that to the incentives that we offer, those are different levels. An example would be we have a quality jobs program. And we're looking to drive jobs that are above our county median wage, which is about $36,000, believe it or not, here in Arizona. And so as we target sectors, we're really looking at, okay, what types of jobs are you going to deliver? And if they meet certain thresholds, we'll offer tax credit incentives. And that particular program turns out to be about $9,000 over the course of 3 years. So that can be substantial to offset some of the revenue liability. We have a qualified facilities program, which is targeted to R&D efforts, manufacturing, headquarters. We look at that in twofold. We look at the capital investment or the number of jobs that will be driven here. So the 20,000, it's the lesser of the two. 10% of capital investment for $20,000 per job. So it's quite lucrative. And there are a number of others, but if you go out to azcommerce.com, you can really drill down and look at all of them. We also provide job training grants where we will reimburse a company for the net new jobs that they're creating and their training curriculum. As long as they have a plan and a budget, they can apply in a competitive round situation. We'll have another one of those coming up in November. And then we have workforce development. We're partnered, the governor created the Office of Economic Opportunity, and that's really a collective resource of recruiters, public and private, our universities are all participating in that. And that's really what companies are looking for, is that talent, and how quickly can I acquire them and then assimilate them into their organization. So it's a tremendous benefit that we're offering. We also have another group called RevAZ. It's part of a federal program, a manufacturing extension program. But these are experts in manufacturing. And they can go in, assess a certain situation with a company that might be coming in or exploring as a manufacturer, or one that's already here. We can help them up level in a number of different ways. We have an import-export group. We've got a group that are focusing on foreign direct investments. So we're really a one-stop shop when you think about economic development. We partner closely with our regional partners. Greater Phoenix Economic Council is our regional partner here. They look after the 23 municipalities. Sun Corridor down in Tucson is the other big regional player. We partner with them all the time. And then our jurisdiction is the urban markets and the rural. And, you know, we have about 4.5 million people there in Phoenix now. Our entire state is only 7 million. I think our GDP is about, in Phoenix, it's about 85% of our entire state. But there is a rural crowd that's hungry. And, you know, it's not those, you know, those rural sectors like mining, or farming, or ranching. They want to get involved in the next generation. I had a woman yesterday at another presentation come up to me, and they're like, I think we could really get behind this FinTech. She's from Prescott, and all the power to her. We want to help facilitate that. So that's a little bit about the Arizona Commerce. Happy to answer questions there, but I want to transition into our value proposition, and specifically into the FinTech realm. Arizona has 28,000 financial service companies today that employ about 450,000 employees. That's the second largest concentration in the US. And that's delivering an economic impact of $68 billion. And so that's not necessarily a natural, you know, line of thinking as far as, wow, you're that big. We are. And if you look at our rich history, I mean, Wells Fargo, US Bank, the list goes on and on. You know, all you have to do is look at the skyline of downtown, and you can see it's littered with banking firms. And they moved here early on because of back office. You know, the high rent, the war on talent in a lot of these tier 1 markets, and they found an early home here, and predominantly in call center, customer care, where they had customer service, they had sales. When you fast forward 5-10 years ago, there's an up-leveling of sorts that have happened. So that evolution of their business and continuing to invest in Arizona. So now, here just within the last 2 years, I've worked with BNP Paribas and their subsidiary Bank of the West. Maybe some of you have seen them on that Broadway curve there in Tempe. You'll see their logo prominently displayed in the whole University of Phoenix building. They've taken 6 floors. They're moving some of their people from San Ramon, but largely they'll be hiring here over 1,000 people. And this isn't the traditional back office. This is shared services. This is HR, IT, legal, finance. And so this conversation about FinTech is a natural fit for us. So the biggest driver here, though, is talent and how quickly they can acquire that talent. And so we're helping them find that talent and drive that talent. The people, and this is a generalization, but I think what's actually happening with this evolution or renaissance of sorts is that people are seeking a better quality of life. And as any economic developer, you're going to hear quality of life, but we really stand behind it because of who we are as a state. You have the best of urban markets complemented by rural. I mean, we have the seventh wonder of the world right in our backyard. And so people can go and play and recreate, they can hike, they can bike, they can run, they can raise a family at an affordable cost of living. And the same is true with businesses. I mean, you can't find a better place, with friendly regulatory environments, a low tax basis. We want to get out of the way. The governor says that it's our job to get out of the way of making business happen. And that's what we're committed to. We're innovators. And so the question that I'm often asked is, why Arizona? And it's for all of those reasons. Shifting gears now to my favorite part. It's what I do every day. I live and breathe business attraction. And I've been in business development for well over 20 years for software companies primarily. I've helped start a couple of companies, one in Boston, one in Seattle, prior to my public service here. And this is certainly a natural fit. And so since the legislation passed, we've been out scurrying the large tier 1 markets, San Francisco, Chicago, Boston, New York. And our approach isn't to show up and to be the know-it-all. It's really about immersion and learning. Just like Evan, I don't come from this space. I don't come from where all of you sit. But I can tell you through this immersion and conversations that I'm having, we're onto something. I was in a conference called Empire FinTech in New York City. The first 3 people that I met, I mentioned their sandbox. And they're like, yeah, we know. And we want to learn more. And it was mentioned on main stage. So the world is watching, they're listening, they want to know what's coming next. I was down in Boston about 3 weeks ago. I was invited by a company called the FinTech Sandbox. They're a nonprofit organization. They're all about helping the next generation FinTech company get started with resources and access to data and code. And Sarah Biller, their founder, she said, come on out. EY is hosting an event. The Lord Mayor of London, his delegation, will be there. And 12 FinTech companies, some from the UK, some from the US, pitched and demoed their products. And I was just sitting there, my head was spinning because it's true innovation, and they are disrupting banking. And they're doing it for different reasons than just revenue and profit. They have this holistic view that here's an industry, just like all the other industries that we've seen disrupted in the last few years. This one is perhaps the biggest that will have an impact not only on us, but really the underserved market. And certainly that's going to benefit the US a great deal. We were in London. My CEO Sandra and a delegation from the Arizona Chamber went over. She presented at the World FinTech Forum, and she served on a panel. Had a lot of interesting conversations, with the likes of IBM and Western Union and Sterling Bank. The incumbents, what I call incumbents, the large institutions, know that they need to do something. And many of them have set up innovation hubs outside of their traditional workspace to create this startup feel. And they're actively reaching out to the startup community to partner and collaborate. In some instances, it's that friendly competition. In some other cases, it's an acquisition. But the idea is there for all, and we're seeing great collaboration in the space. So I guess, in closing, we've always embodied the spirit of forging the next frontier. And I think that attitude is not only persuasive here, but it matters. It matters because we're ready. Arizona has been born for this moment, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen because we're just scratching the surface. Thank you.
Cool. Evan, you want to? So there's a key part that we didn't talk about that is happening in unison with the FinTech Sandbox becoming effective, which is August the 3rd. But I think it's particularly of interest to this group. The equity crowdfunding bill and initiative has been expanded, right? And I think it's gone up to like $5 million or something like that. Yeah. And there's also an initial coin offering provision. So, Evan, I don't know if you're prepared to talk about that, but I think the folks in this room are particularly interested in what's been created around the initial coin offering and how they have set it up between a utility token as well as, I don't know what the other term is, but security basically, yeah. You want to talk about that a little bit? And then
Yeah, to the extent that I can. I don't know this bill quite, or this new law quite as well as the FinTech bill, but I do know that we anticipate there being some play with what is able to be done in Arizona through that new law with the sandbox. It's not going to necessarily always be apples to apples. It may not always work out that's something that somebody wants to do under the crowdfunding law can also come into the sandbox. But we are anticipating that there will be some crossover. And that's probably the extent that I can address the idea. I know it's something that a lot of people are excited about, but stay tuned.
Cool.
I think we'll be seeing development.
And then I'm going to hog another question because I'm hosting this thing. But, so the advice portion of the FinTech Sandbox, can that cover cryptocurrency advice? Or have you gotten that far with it? Did I understand that correctly? That there's a provision where if you're operating in the FinTech Sandbox, you can actually be giving advice, or it covers advice, or safe harbor for advice?
It covers investment advising, which is something that's actually regulated by the Corporation Commission. To the extent that you're offering advice about securities, which I think most of us expect that crypto is going to be regulated in some sense as a security by the SEC, by the states, yes, I think the sandbox would. There would be a place in the sandbox for those wanting to offer, whether it be some kind of robo-advising tool or an innovative way to provide advice related to crypto that is securities. Yeah, I think the sandbox is part of that.
Just as a footnote to that, I was before I got into telecommunications and the internet and all that sort of thing, I was a successful securities broker for over 10 years. And the licensing requirements and the things that are going on today in terms of what people are saying and writing and speaking and whatever, it is erasing the lines between, talking about things and actually giving advice. So this safe harbor that's available through the FinTech Sandbox, I think, is a key component in the advice realm. So, all right, Bill, yes.
Okay, could you talk a little bit about this restriction of only working with Arizona customers? Because by its very nature, we're going to have to be dealing on an international global scale. So how are you going to stop it from being Arizona customers?
So there is an element in any regulatory system where the business has to comply or take the risk of whatever risks that may come with that. So in terms of what are we going to do to stop you, a business that wants to scale globally, I don't know that there's much that we can physically do. Now, I will say that if someone is scaling in a way that maybe they misrepresented what they told the Attorney General's office they were going to do, part of their test, the Attorney General's office has the ability to remove someone from the sandbox for reasonable cause. So I don't know how responsive that is. I mean, I think the bottom line is that this is a limited tool, and for ideas that might need to scale globally, we are optimistic that at some point this will be a tool where that can happen. But there is that limitation. We are a state regulator and only regulate what we have jurisdiction.
What is the extent to which the deal flow through the sandbox will have public transparency?
What do you mean by public transparency?
Will the public see what deals are being processed, who's applied, what types of deals they are, which of the three sectors they fall in? Those are examples.
Okay, I think I understand now. At this point, we're not anticipating releasing the names, at least from the Attorney General's office of who is in the sandbox. However, there is a disclosure requirement that participants are required to make to their consumers. So there, in some sense, it's going to be on the participants themselves to disclose that they are part of this program. And certainly the customers that they are working with, it's required that the businesses disclose to those customers that they are in Sandbox, that they're authorized to act pursuant to being in Sandbox. And we envision that's where the transparency is going to be. And that's something that we want to take care of on the front end. We want to know how that's going to happen, what those disclosures are going to look like, and that will be part of our evaluation process.
So you see no disclosure from the AG's office?
At this point, I don't believe that's going to happen. That could change.
I have a question. In that public record,
the sandbox legislation made records, information that the Attorney General obtains in administering the sandbox confidential, so it's not a public record.
So when transactions are going through the system, consumer lending versus securities versus it would be across the areas, it could be touching many legislations, not just the banking legislation or security legislations or insurance legislation. So how do we mitigate those kind of overlaps that happen? You get the concept and a product, but when I actually start putting in there, I am overlapping across my
That's a great question. I don't know that I can answer that question as a regulator. Likely there will be a need to consult a lawyer or a professional that has knowledge of what jurisdictions might be implicated by whatever activity you're thinking about. Again, we're the state of Arizona. We can only regulate to the extent we have jurisdiction.
Talking with these guys, so it's
Yes, yes.
Question.
You have talked about working like closely with other sandbox in other jurisdictions. So could it possibly a way that can expand that only limited our testing within Arizona, like 10,000? Right. By nature, as you say, all these apps will be really targeted for global. So would you think about like work with other samples in other jurisdictions?
Absolutely. That's something that we envisioned, and one of the reasons we were excited when we had that ability given to us in the legislation as it was passed to go and create agreements with other jurisdictions that might have a sandbox. I think this will has the potential to do that. How it works out, I don't know. Ultimately, that's two jurisdictions, two regulators with a lot of different factors ultimately coming together to say, yes, we want to cooperate in this way. But I think that is something that we are envisioning and hope will happen to some extent.
Tyler, before we leave that topic, Tyler, have you, within the ACA, have you had any conversations about collaborating with other states?
Like the UK sandbox.
Like the UK.
Yeah. We're engaged in those conversations. I know that there are conversations right now at the Fed level to tackle some of these issues, but certainly with the UK and their sandbox, we're looking at how we can collaborate there. Doesn't stop at the UK though. You've got Australia, you have Luxembourg,
United Arab Emirates.
The list is long. And so, how this evolves in future legislation and what's important, there are a lot of TBDs here, and we have to work through this process. But I think what's important is that Arizona, we've taken that first step. There are other states that are envious. I know that, there are a few that would have been way out ahead and should have been way out ahead by the very nature of the business that's occurring in their jurisdictions.
And before so there are multiple dimensions going on here. One is collaboration with other states within the United States, externally other sovereignties around the world. But I think there's also another layer, which is I think the feds are watching what is happening here, because the federal regulators are just as hungry to figure out something that works. You have the chairman of the SEC, the CFTC talking to Congress on a regular basis now, and they're all trying to get their arms around this. So I think what we're pioneering here in Arizona on this, limited basis, you're right, 10,000 customers, not much, but it's still a way to start to work out something that will work all the way around. And from my view, and I might be going way out on a limb on this, but it looks to me like I could try some things in this sandbox. And if it is questioned by the federal regulators, I think I've got a pretty good basis to stand on, saying that, hey, look, our state regulators looked at this. It's under their scrutiny, under their guidelines. We're trying to work with them. And I think that's going to go a long way towards creating something that's viable at the multiple levels of government here. So that's great.
I actually had a question. Does the other sandbox operate ways? How does Arizona give a framework for these other sandboxes?
We're the only one. Now I know that Illinois is right behind us. I know that North Carolina has a presence. Massachusetts is also pushing forward. But for ours, we modeled after the best, which is London. and what they've done. They have a unique position where they don't have as much regulation. They actually have one body, CA.
The exchequer,
What is it?
exchequer is
Yeah,
like their secretary of the treasury.
Yeah, and they've had,
We just, yeah.
and maybe you're gonna cover this, but I'll jump ahead. They've actually had 68 entities go through their sandbox, and
90% of them kind of made it out to
Yeah,
a
90
viable
90%
acquisition or standalone.
graduated to something bigger. And I think they generated, what, $370 million in business and revenues and things like that. So
Yeah.
that's pretty impressive.
And we'll learn from them. You know, I
Yeah.
just talked to one last week, and they're sharing their experience, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we can learn from them as well.
Yeah. Somebody else had a question.
You know what? We could talk about
We got a deal for you.
We do have some examples on electricity.
There are some special data center kind of
Yeah, that's true.
regulations here. There's actually tax credits for buying data center equipment that arguably could be applied to the kind of servers and hardware in a mining operation.
Definitely.
So for those of you that don't know, this is Mark Goldstein, who works with the AZ Tech Council, and he's very active in many of the regulatory realms and is a great resource for a lot of this legislation and a lot of the activity that's going on at the state capitol. So, yes. Other questions?
So, any thoughts on the transition, let's say the high water mark as it's stated? So, are there any, like, offices that are set up or the council or the national council authority that helps transition over actually bigger than 10,000 or the amounts and what your emission process? Like, this initially started, and let's say I'm actually successful, right? And then now what? Now how do I transition over? Still the regulations are still pertinent, right? As soon as I start trying to move out of the sandbox to a normal environment, during the transition, I still have to deal with the regulations.
So let me jump in on this one. I think if you start in the sandbox and you demonstrate, you do a proof of concept that gets even 1,000, customers that are using it, you're going to be able to attract capital and go through the money transfer licensing process, which is what, $1 million or something like that,
Or jurisdiction.
or the jurisdiction. So I think there is a pathway out of the sandbox, but this is a way to prove your concept without having to go through the onerous process and expensive process of getting a money transfer license.
But also the 2 years that you may be in the sandbox, we're expecting some transformation in federal regulation that may revise the state's rights and overseeing of MTL and redefine things. So the sandbox gives you a place to play, but the world around you may liberalize more generally in the meantime.
Yeah, and I think that, all the dimensions of know your customer and the, terrorist financing, all that entanglement, I think this sandbox gives you some safe harbor in that. And the biggest thing in these ICOs, in my view, it's not the regulatory 3 and 4 letter jungle that you got to navigate. It's getting through the volcano of the class action lawsuits. That's the real killer when you're out there floating these ICOs and so forth. Because, every billboard with attorney friendly smiling that you've seen on the freeway, it's not going to take them very long before they figure out there's money in this class action lawsuit thing, which is already happening. So in my view, as an entrepreneur, I see this sandbox as a way to put somewhat of a, protection around that dimension of this whole thing. So sorry to jump in.
And credibility. You're paired with the regulator, the innovator and regulator on the front end, rather than in the arrears, having that conversation. And you're establishing credibility with the consumer, that trust and the iterations that you're going to go through. Everybody feels good, and it's transparent.
Yeah, if I could speak to that dimension as well, because I think it's important to articulate it, and maybe we already have, but in order for this whole ecosystem to scale, there has to be these consumer safeguards. And there has to be mechanisms where something akin to the customer service number is available to folks that lose their private keys. Or this thing's going to be in the realm of, the esoteric tech community, blah, blah, blah. To really take this from where we've gone over the last few years to the next level, we need the consumer, I like to call them safeguards rather than protections, that Evan and Attorney General Brnovich and Paul Watkins are wrestling with. Yes.
Is the AG going to recover the private keys?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
The AG is not going to recover the private keys, but I think there's a way to experiment with multi-signature constructs where you've got like a digital concierge in the middle that can restore, serve a lot of purposes. And the other part of that, is that you also protect yourself against the advice portion. Because if you get into, I can imagine, getting into a situation where you've got some sort of prototype going on where you're helping somebody restore their private keys. And one thing that Paul Watkins talked about was sort of an escrow function could fall within this sandbox, where you're serving in sort of a fiduciary responsibility to restore private keys. That's an interesting dimension of this whole thing, which I think is, really, really needed at this point.
You've had your hand up for a while.
Yes.
Okay, so Evan, you said that you are committed to protect or support the applicant, to make the application process easy. I'm thinking do you have what exactly? Do you have any program that can make who wanted to apply more informed, a kind of a support team or consultant that can go through different kind of cases, use cases, and then exactly saying what is possible in the or what is being offered in the sandbox. And for now, I feel even in this community, we still have problems understanding what is there for us, or what is what you offer, and what exactly sandbox is, and what's the potential for the links that you said, what is it really or for a specific use. Do you have any program that can? Because most of these programs are people with a startup. We don't have so much money to spend for attorney or legal. So, do you have any program around that can support people to kind of incentive that more people come in and be informed? All these great things that we provide.
I think don't have a program. To some extent, we're limited by our own limited resources in the level of service that we might be able to provide. We also have a duty to not provide legal advice. As lawyers, we can't provide legal advice to people. So there is a balance, a bit of a tightrope that we're going to have to walk. Because we're not doing it currently, I know that we aren't going to be perfect, maybe ever, but I hope and certainly want to have this become more of a collaborative process. At what level that happens, I can't say. But certainly when we're envisioning the application process as being something that isn't onerous, that isn't burdensome, we don't want it to be. And, but that said, how much advice are we going to be able to give applicants? Probably not a ton. We will do what we can to provide information that I think will be relevant to most applicants, so that on the front end, we're providing some level of understanding and information publicly that would allow someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of resources to wade their way through. You know, given that there is a 90-day window between submission and we have to decide whether the applicant can, I think that itself will allow for some give and take if the initial submission may not be sufficient to give us comfort that what we're looking for is satisfied. That's where I envision most of the back and forth happening. So I think we'll see. I'm hopeful that we can be as helpful as we can, but there are some competing duties at issue here. So there won't be a customer service hotline or anything.
What's that?
Let me just add to that,
Yeah, go ahead.
because there, you know, with what the ACA is doing, it's not just going out and looking for the next FinTech unicorn. That'd be great if we could find it. The first step in this process is to identify the experts and for them to come along. The subject matter experts are out there. I've met them in Chicago. There's an organization called FinX, FINEX. In Boston, there's a company called FinTech Sandbox. Check them out, because they are tackling this very issue, you know, where a lot of these companies are bootstrapped and they don't have the legal resources. They don't have expertise and some data. They're pulling together this collective resource to help. And I can envision us doing the same down here. So, you know, we've taken the legislative to policy, and now let's go out and execute. How will this happen? We're planning an event called the Future of FinTech in Arizona, tentatively for November, but it's still TBD. It'll be a one-day event. We will fly in the experts. We will have you know, an engaging conversation, and that will be open to all of you, you know, to come and learn more from them.
So if I could jump in with something, I know you've got a burning question back there, but.
I have a burning question. I have information for her.
Oh, okay. Well, go ahead.
I'm in the start. Are you in it? Okay, I am too. Let me give you my card because I don't want to take any time. The ecosystem you're looking for is SCORE, and Maricopa County has through Mesa Community College. So they're kind of high level. For our level, we need to go to SCORE. They have legal counsel that even gives you free time. And Maricopa, they have counselors and stuff. And then there's Coplex. There's Coplex out of Galvanize. So there's Rick, and there's like all these different. So it's coming together, and it's based around what they're doing, but it's, you know.
Yeah.
You have to go and kind of have to hold it together.
Yeah, there are perfect comment, because there are resources that are available. We've got several people here from the ASU Law School, and that are either lawyers or law students. And I'm not proposing legal advice, but and I didn't plan this, I swear, for the conversation to get to this point, but we have instituted a new level of participation for Desert Blockchain called the Desert Blockchain Citizen. And basically you can go to Patreon, sign up, it's $10 a month basically. And here's a device that we're going to be playing with to build some blockchain stuff on, the hardware portion. And I'd like to introduce Mark Murphy. I've been talking with Mark about setting up some workshops on like Blockchain 101, but we could definitely incorporate this sandbox, you know, navigating the sandbox over the next few months, because we've got the people and the interest here. And We've also got the facility of UAT. We've got awesome meeting space and so forth, and we can build upon that so we can start to collaborate and learn among one another. We've got, you know, technical talent in this room. We've got entrepreneurial talent. We've got legal talent. We've got policy talent. So the elements are all here. I'm committed to continuing to bring those things together. And, you know, I think, Marjan, we could do some workshops and some, you know, short sessions where we're just kind of, and we can do them virtually as well, you know, Google Hangouts. So anyway, that's the plug.
Yeah, so there's been a couple of blockchain-facing bills that have passed in the last year. One that allows for signatures on the blockchain, another one that allows for certain corporate documents. Would it be a crossover into the FinTech Sandbox for private companies to issue shares, something like that on the blockchain to customers or assets or something like that?
Security shares?
Yeah, securities, exactly.
The Corporation Commission is going to have something to say about that.
That's part of the reason for my question is, you know, does that fall inside of that sandbox, or is that going to be regulated outside of it?
At this point, again, speaking for myself here, I would say no. I think securities are outside of what the scope of the sandbox is.
But it might, Marcus, it might fall within this equity crowdfunding realm. Might not be as,
Yeah, I'm not thinking about crowdfunding specifically. I mean, that could be an application. I'm thinking more of, you know, I run a company and I do want to offer. I mean, I guess it sort of sounds like a crowd sale, but I'm thinking of something that's a bit more commoditized. So I offer those shares on the market. Purchasing that sort of thing.
It might be a path you could navigate. It's not obvious, perhaps. Yeah.
Okay. Nobody's.
Not yet.
I'm not really familiar with state sandboxes, but besides the regulatory and the stated and often operational incentives for collaborating, besides just, I guess, the regulatory, is there other loans offered, other incentives?
I would encourage you to check out our innovation page on the Arizona website. One particular program that comes to mind is our Innovation Challenge. We offer up $3 million in competitive business plan competition. And there are six winners in the spring and then in the fall. And that averages out about $250,000. So that would certainly be an opportunity. And then they have a slew of other resources and I'd be happy to connect you.
yeah, I think we are in a space where the different entities, be it seed funding or you know, angel funding and so forth, they would probably be open to proposals. So if a team or whatever put together a proposal and submitted it to some of the angel funders in this context, especially to further the FinTech Sandbox, I think that would have a lot of weight to it. So. How about 2 more questions, and then we're going to do some wrap up here.
And I'm kind of confused on the ICO aspect. You said you could raise up to $5 million, but the very nature of an ICO is that crowd sale, not to a specific state, but you know, wherever the blockchain applies, usually globally. So is there going to be some type of, you know, regulation going to be made for that, or is that like lifting off the bat?
I'd say that's something you probably have to talk to council about. I'm not sure I'm prepared to offer an opinion.
Is there any way to get connected? Give us more information about that?
Yeah, because the very nature of an ICO isn't to be centralized in one state. It's to be globally. So the fact that it's restricted to one domain doesn't make really any sense. I mean, I love the idea
Well-
of the FinTech Sandbox, and I like that, you know,
Yeah.
you can have a safe space to operate in and providing financial services, but at the same time, there has to be these type of considerations made.
And this is what we're looking for. You know, the experts are you. This blockchain and fintech legislation, what wasn't birthed from you know, a representative. You know, it was experts having those conversations with like Rep Wenninger. You know, he championed a lot of this, but behind the scenes, it was the experts that helped them create and pen the legislation. So, yeah, I think that's a good starting point to have that conversation with your representative. And say,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I spoke with Representative Wenninger yesterday, and he's interested in coming here and speaking with us again. And I actually extended an invitation that I'll share with you for a few minutes, and maybe he'll join us or not, but he's definitely interested in coming and speaking. And I would go out on a limb, and I would say Paul Watkins is probably interested in having another sit down, like a town hall, on how this thing is going and get some feedback. There again, as you know, was said, this is all brand new. We're making it up as we're going along. And there's part of what's being articulated tonight is an interest on both sides, the innovators as well as the policymakers, to surface some of these things like you're talking about, the global nature of ICOs. You know, how do we handle that? Is there some sort of provision that needs to be made? So it's, rather than focusing on the particulars as they've been laid out so far, I think the real focus here is on the conversation and the lines of communication. So, yeah.
So could I use the sandbox for the following? I create my own blockchain and I want to use it to DOS attack it. And that the DOS attack stays only on my blockchain for my testing purposes. It doesn't affect anybody else's. Are you going to provide that?
What is a DOS attack?
Denial of service attack on the blockchain to test its vulnerabilities.
So in other words, if I could maybe translate that, are there safeguards in the event that the backbone of the financial piece is actually taken down?
Right.
What happens then?
Like, can you segment it among that pay $500 a pop?
I am guessing that our state legislature has not focused on the DDoS elements of blockchain at this point. But it's a very interesting use case that there are people with the Arizona Cyber Warfare Range. There's a Cyber Warfare Range here. We would like to experiment with blockchain, cybersecurity elements of blockchain, DDoSing, and so forth.
Is this a proper use of this?
I would say that's kind of in the gray area that we don't really know, but I think it's a great point. And I think there's another point where we can actually experiment with the security elements of the Internet of Things. Because if you've got terminals where people are, you know, holding their wallets or swiping debit cards and whatever, those all bring up vulnerabilities that we could experiment with in this realm. So I think that's all part of the use case and the conversation that we're surfacing. Great point.
Yeah, I have a policy update for anybody that's interested. I'll send you a soft copy. But cybersecurity is one of the high priorities of the governor. He actually put together a task force, and that task force might be a good place to start that conversation.
Yeah, I would suggest maybe having two sandboxes, one for what you intended it to do, and one for this other initiative. Because I think it'll kill the other side. It's going to be hard for you to regulate a DOS attack, right?
Yeah.
The whole point is that there's gonna be vulnerabilities that you can't guess ahead of time.
Well, and I
You have to-
think that's part of the wisdom of starting small. You know,
Less surface.
well, it's less surface. It's also, you know, I'd much rather be in a DDoS with 1,000 customers than, you know, 10 million, or be defending a $4 billion ICO that I just launched that's kind of blowing up right now. Yeah, I don't know who that would apply to. But anyway, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. So on that cheery note, I'm going to do a little screen sharing here and talk about an opportunity that fits in very well, I think, with this conversation. So this is something that's coming up, and it's going to happen right here. It's the Arizona Blockathon. This will be the 3rd Arizona Blockathon, and it's going to be open to up to 50 developers and designers by invitation. And the format of the day is basically we meet in this room. We have a morning of talks. We'll have 4 talks, and you know, I don't want to put Representative Winninger on the spot, but I have invited him to be one of the talks on this. And I just released this, by the way, today, and you'll see Arizona FinTech Sandbox opportunities where we can continue this conversation. But the idea is we have teams, either preformed teams. If you got a preformed team, that's great. If you have, you don't have a team, but you've got at least a year of software development experience, you can come and we'll form teams for those that aren't on a team. But we form teams, have teams, go to lunch, come up with ideas, and then basically hack for about 3 hours. And if you come up with code, great. If you just come up with a presentation, and then we present at the end of the day, and we vote among ourselves as to what the best ideas are. And the last time we did this, we used the Ethereum blockchain to do the voting. It's rather crude, but it was voting on the blockchain. So I think all this conversation fits into the next Arizona Blockathon, and it's an opportunity where we can experiment, we can form teams, we can learn from one another. You don't have to know anything about blockchain in order to participate, but you do have to know how to, you know, use the command line and Git and, you know, HTML, CSS, a little bit of JavaScript. So that's an opportunity to do what you're talking about. Stand up a blockchain and let's attack it, and let's see, you know, how that can be countered.
Hey, Jay,
yeah.
Is it possible to get like more time to hack on the next blockathon?
More time to hack?
Yeah, 3 hours is
yeah.
Yeah, the first hour is like getting the idea.
Right.
So
we've had 2 of these already, and we had 5 teams the first time, 3 with working code, and 4 teams the second time, 2 with working code. This is all recorded, and you're right, it is compressed, and it's designed to be more of an ideation day rather than coming up with something that's finished. And you guys came up with a couple projects that were awesome. Yeah. You, Marcus, you want to talk a little bit about you know, what you came up with and your experience? And I know you'd like more time. We'd always like more time, but
yeah,
to hack. But
no, it was cool because the people that show up, like, so I'm a blockchain architect, so I'm a developer, but the other people on my team weren't necessarily in that space, but their ideas were just as valid. And it was a lot of fun taking their concepts and turning them into, you know, something that blockchain could be applied to. And it's also a good networking opportunity as well. So I recommend it, even if you don't plan on joining on the team, just to come and observe and check it out and give your input. And that's pretty much it. But
yeah,
the other ideas, like you didn't vote on your own idea. And the other ideas that were presented besides our team were completely different, but also like very innovative and interesting. So
yeah. There, just about every idea, I can't think of a single idea that did not have a lot legs and viability, given more time. But the idea was to spark the teams, come up with some ideas, and then continue the process. And I think what we might have here at UAT is a physical space where we can continue the meeting and the process, because that's one of the things that we wanted to put into place. And I'd like to talk with some of the funding sources so that we could add a little bit of funding to these teams so that we could do the legal support, the marketing support, the administrative support. Because when you leave that to the developers, it's pretty predictable what's going to happen. So anyway, we're right on 8:30. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, and I got a ton out of this. So thank you, Evan. Thank you, Tyler. Really awesome. Thank you.
Jay, what I might do is send over that